好了，当然了，先对哪一道？先对哪一道？
We'll begin with the opening prayers.
Indra-shiri gyobha-nyi-se-ne Tun-san-li-she-dom-dir-so-ande Di-dan-de-ge-du-ma-tam-je-pa-yon-sen-ge Jun-sen Dong-me-me-pa-kong-be-pi-chon Te-be-pa-ru-sen-dir-so-ande Sende chanjuro nyembe bebe se si samen ni neradote chelo seba chebe namdaraji kume jemba dendir soande chambe loji ninji donjo tanjawa meba engi jonambrada Tome gyoda jela da gyoshi medange bra sindri soa Nyemonge lo geji medon shi kade shaya chulun chi kewe nganzu sambo mi tongwe shinyin penzi gandri soan so ra jena nyamja ne rangi so sura jebe shiragi Chero Jesu Jubra Misheba Ngede Thambara Chete Soa Chembara Chala Zishi Jishi Loi Mena Daba Namji Sanjirane Gela Jove Lodre Givede Nyosong Ora Zede Soa Tedra Yende Jele Gekando Chashi Jube Lusen Tende Bagama Baye Gomba Zonji Sho Ho Sangye Jedang Soye Shonam La Chenjo Bando Dane Yesus Tage Junye Gibe Sanam Ye Rola Ben Sangye Rubra Jo Sangye Jedang Soye Shonam Chenjo Bando Dane Yesus Tage Junye Gibe Sanam Ye Rola Ben Sangye Rubra Jo Sangye Jedang Soye Shonam Chenjo Bando Dane Yesus Dagi Jingi Gibe Sanam Ge Rola Ben Sangye Robra Jo Chanse Wanan Chiji Chaba Jeso Yera Guji Sewa Gewa Jose Dagi Jizaba Tamje Dam Chanju Jemo Sashi Buji Joji Medo Reja Venishi Ninde Gemba Sangye Shindo Mede Buai Roge Nanda Jinla Jebra Jo Senje Namye Samba Loye Jera Jida Shijon de Monde Bai Chege Golo Golo So
대다도 전화받아 보면 남의 주제는 이제 알아가는 mem지 원보다 예전에는 저런 상황자가 나서 그래서 너는 이제 남의 주제는 이제 간다 조조동에나 대실로 저 공소도 되게 매주 이제 년마다 이제 라에게 나는 이제 로모도 되면 로아군이라게 저만 함재게 도다게 저도 손이 가서 기회에서 다음에 이거 선배반 버스 예로 고금 잡기로 니스를 보면 이제 조바신도 스바서 말랑에 와 야외도 좀 시작해서 시작해봐 뭐지 저 점검사 미래다 배서리 미럼 줄로 좀 아주 대신 구신데 부터서 뭐 용전한마 유잖아 시작하라 헤르비 우리 저던 주제는 아버 야외다 먹고 내서 막 여름 못 살아 찬사 오늘도 저를 근소하나 막뭐 지금으로 근소는 시집에 좀 이런 좀 맞추려고 이제 저로 언제 저좀 빌린 저를 내주지 그래도 좀 담에도 지금 시제순의 남자도 유선으로 건드려 랭닝바다 뒤주자라는 이거 미규도 지샤블라 상스 번에서 남아를 못하다 그저로 배면 되는 그진 심에 권에 저선 고선도 영으로 자도 나수다다 도마 아주 원디가기 겸보계획 신이 넘버 3
First of all, I would like to offer my welcomes to the Khenpos and spiritual teachers from the various monasteries and nunneries, as well as to the monastics, and in particular the nuns from our nuns Shedras, and also the people from the East and West who are watching this webcast. So I'd like to offer you an auspicious welcome. As I mentioned the other day, what I'd like to speak about today is the practice of the path of the greater individual from the autobiographical verses of Good Deeds by Mikyo Dorje. And so in connection with that, I would like to speak about the Great Encampment's rules concerning meat. And in particular, I would like to speak about how the Eighth Karmapa Mikyo Dorje prohibited meat, and how the Vinaya allows meat that is pure in the three ways. Now, I cannot speak about the entire subject of eating meat today, so I'll have to speak about half of it tomorrow. But in general, in the Great Encampment, there were very strict rules regarding meat. But these strict rules regarding meat did not start during the time of the Eighth Karmapa. And this is an old rule or an old regulations or practice that was practiced during the times of several previous Karmapas. So how do we know that it was practiced during the time of the previous Karmapas? There is a text by the ninth Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje called The Great Rule Book for the Great Encampment, the Ornament of the World. And what this says is that the examples of the King of Dharma Drung Dzamlimpa, Lord Deshin Shekpa, glorious Tongwa Dundun, Kyawan Chura Gyatso are similar. In particular, they gathered only monastics around them. And those who were included in the encampment could not have any meat, not even the hair of a deer, or drink any alcohol, not even as much as the tip of a blade of a grass. They performed untold actions of the higher states through the many customs of Sutra and Tantra and of the two traditions. After them, Lord Mikyo Dorje did not waver some steeds and examples. Not only that, he also brought practitioners of these constant teachings into the methods of having revulsion, giving up the worldly activities and upholding the teachings through teaching, debate, and composition. He established new monastic communities, built statues, raised his students in headstands, and wrote treatises beyond our conception. He guided his students to have confidence of examining the oceans of our own and other schools. His influence and kindness are indescribable. So this is what it says. Now, what this is describing is, and the Drung Zamble is a name of Rilpa Dorje. So Rilpa Dorje, Deshin Shekpa, Tongwan Dun, and Chura Gyatso. So during the time of those four Karmapas, no meat, not even the hair of a deer could be allowed in the encampment, nor was there any alcohol, not even as much as would fit on the tip of a blade of grass. Similarly, there is a text there's a text by Karma Chakme called "The Worlds of the Pendita Jamyan from the North: The Faults of Meat and Distinguishing What is Allowed and What is Prohibited." Now, what it says in this text is that there are always 500 pictures with outer robes around Rilpa Dorje. And he perfected the example of not allowing meat, not even the hair of a deer, to come into his sight. From that on time, most of the Dharma organizations founded by Lord Mikyo Dorje had strict rules against meat. At Ningling Monastery, there was no rule against meat, but a separate meat with a vegetarian stock, a separate soup with vegetarian stock was made for the vegetarians. The Karmapa and Heart Sons ate only vegetarian and never allowed any meat in their sight. In Gana Chakras, the meat offering was eaten by everyone, and even the Karmapas and his Hatsan ate a small amount so as not to violate Samaya. Now, what it says in the Colophon, it says, meat and Kana Chakra offerings were distinguished to the words that Sutra Stanchas and Mahasiddhas and following the example of the Great Encampment. So what this is saying is that, as it said in the citation from the ninth Karmapa Wangcha Dorje, from the time of the fourth Karmapa onward, it was not allowed to bring any meat, not even as much as the hair from an animal, into the great encampment. And so they gave that pure example, and from that time, the various incarnations of the karma continued to uphold, preserve, and spread that example. In particular, most of the monasteries founded by Mikyo Dorje had very strict rules against meat. And there was a monastery called Nyingma Monastery. This was a shedder that was founded by the sixth Shamar Chukye Wanchok. And Kama Chukme went to this actually. So he studied at this monastery and knew it very well. So at that monastery, there was no rule against meat. There was a particular vegetarian soup that was made with a vegetarian stock that was made separately for the vegetarians. Likewise, the Karmapa 10th Karmapa Chung Dorje and his heart sons included Shama Chugye only ate vegetarian and never allowed any meat in their sight. However, when they had Gana Chakras, even everyone who is ordinarily vegetarian ate a small amount of the meat offering. And even the Karmapa and his heart son, so as not to violate the secret mantra of Vajrayana, ate a small amount of meat. And so that is what it explains in detail. And so for that reason, if we look at these sources, what we can know is that from the time of Rilpa Dorje, the great encampment had become much larger and more organized at that time, as I explained the other day. And there are very strict rules about meat. And I think the strict rules of meat could be said to be a distinctive feature of the great encampment, and I don't think it would be going too far to say that. Now, what source do we have? What clear source do we have and reliable source do we have to say that these rules were originated during the time of the fourth Karmapa Rilpa Dorje? Well, in the liberation story of Rilpa Dorje called Delighting the Scholars, written by his direct disciple Karma Kunshun, it says, all the members of his entourage lift off the three white foods. If the bones of a slaughtered animal were seen in the places where the masters and disciples had stayed, they were reprimanded. Not even the scent of toxins such as alcohol was allowed to waft within the confines of the encampment. He brought everyone into pure conduct. So here it says the entourage of Rilpa Dorje, but also all the people who are around him, they lived off of the three white phones. And when the master and disciples saw, if they were to see the bones of slaughtered animals when a camp was taken down, they would reprimand people. And there was no way to bring alcohol and intoxicants inside the camp. Likewise, there is a liberation story of Rilpa Dorje by his student, Tsurpa Kumbangpa. There was no way that even the tiniest amount of meat or the mere scent of alcohol could be in the encampment. His conduct was the perfection of purity, and the power of his compassion extremely great. When people gathered from hundreds of thousands at most, or no less than 500 at the least, the greatest developed shamatha insight, the middling developed certainty in the meaning of the words, and even the least committed to continue reciting mantras, to encourage the people in the area to give up killing sentient beings and to recite the names of the Buddhas. This example of benefiting beings in many skillful ways is inconceivable. So during the time of during the life of Rilpa Dorje, the liberation stories written by his direct disciples describe this very clearly. So I think that these are a really good source. So, well, it says that we say that it's very strict that this meat was strictly prohibited in the encampment. So how strict was the how strict were the encampment's rules about meat? Well, I think if we look at the ninth Karmapa's rules for the encampment, we can understand this one. What it says in these: during the great festival of the encampment, meat may not be eaten. And so what this is saying is that I forget about it. No need to mention the ordinary times, but even when we're having great festivals such as New Year's, or when we're having larger meals, even during those times, meat was not allowed. Meat was served. And so it's not necessarily to mention about the ordinary times during the meat. Even at Losuru, you were not allowed at all to bring meat, to serve meat. This is very clear that this was prohibited. It also says in the rules for the encampment, if meat were offered, actually make 100-fold offering were not allowed, except at sacred sites and during rituals. One may not combine festivals and service at will and hold a Gana Chakra. During regular pujas also, there should be no dedicated meat. No one inside or outside the encampment should slaughter an animal or butcher it. This is extremely important. If anyone should do this, they must carry the Karmapa in his heart sons, and if they still do not listen, they will be expelled from the encampment or given the lowest position, whichever is appropriate. And so the meaning of this is that if someone were to offer meat to the Karmapa and his disciples, it would say that it says you could not include it, that the meat could not be listed in the list of offerings. And you weren't allowed to include it in the offers listed in the offerings listed. Similarly, when the great encampment went to a sacred site, or when there are special times, such as the celebrations of the anniversaries of the passings of the previous Karmapas, during those times one could have a Gana Chakra. Otherwise, during regular pujas or in other situations, you couldn't just say, I'm going to have a Gana Chakra and have it. You weren't allowed to just have any Gana Chakra you wanted, because you could call something a Gana Chakra and eat meat, so you weren't allowed to have Gana Chakras. Likewise, no matter whether you're inside or outside the encampment, you couldn't slaughter any animal at all. You also could not couldn't butcher a slaughtered animal, and this is extremely important. And if there was someone who did this, someone who actually did that, or who had a connection or participated in it, they would have to take responsibility for the lives of the Karmapa and his heart sons, and if still did not listen, they would be expelled from the encampment. They would not be allowed to remain within the encampment, or they would be demoted to the lowest position. So whatever rank they would be at, they'd be demoted. And so this would be, the punishment would be appropriate to the circumstances and the time. Now, if we look at this time, if we think that if someone were expelled from the great encampment, they could go somewhere else, but it was not so easy at that time. Once someone was expelled from the great encampment, no other Karma Kagyu monastery or association would be allowed to take care of that person. Not only was one expelled from the great encampment, but you were also expelled from the Karma Kagyu. That's how it was. And so for these reasons, it's extremely strict. So what is the reason why the meat was prohibited so strictly in the encampment? Well, there are many reasons, of course, but the main reason is that there are hundreds of thousands of people in the encampment, and so if you were to serve meat for them, there would be the danger that many sentient beings would be specifically killed for that purpose. And so that is, I think, the reason why the meat was prohibited in the encampment. And if you need to serve meat to that many people, you can't wait until there are enough corpses of dead animals. So you'd have to kill animals. And therefore you'd be, and so then this be animal that is dedicated to them, or in terms of Vinaya, this is called meat that is impure in the three ways. And so there's a great difficulty or great harm to eating that. So I think that is the main reason why this was prohibited. Now, in particular, so we're speaking about the time of Mikyo Dorje, and so for that reason, so what is the example that Mikyo Dorje gave about meat? He especially strictly, he had made especially strict prohibitions against eating meat. Now, there are many reasons why he did this. Now, for one perspective is, as I said before, when he was young. The seventh Karmapa Chudachaso had passed away. And from that time until Mikyo Dorje was enthroned in the Great Encampment, the rules and regulations of the previous time all were disregarded, and basically all the sentient beings that were all the animals that were offered were killed and eaten, and their meat was eaten, and so that was the situation. And so when Mikyo Dorje actually saw these situations, and when he realized what a difficulty it was bringing, that Mikyo Dorje himself came to be a bit older and gained a bit of power himself. He strictly prohibited meat in the encampment and was very strict and very insistent about it. Not only in the Great Encampment, he also encouraged people, or he started a movement, we would say these days, started a movement to prevent the eating of meat all over Tibet. The way we know this is that in the catalog of his collected works by the fifth Shama, there is a text called A Letter to My Defenseless Mothers, primarily in the Land of Snows, about how eating meat is wrong. So there's a text with this title. That was like an announcement or a spread throughout all of Tibet. But we don't have this text right now, but I think that someday we will get a copy of it. Even though we don't know exactly what is said in the text, just seeing the title, what we can understand is that he is not only in the Great Encampment and the monasteries and monasteries he founded, he's really publicized widely that it was all over Tibet that eating meat is inappropriate. So I think we can understand this just from the title. Also, just give some citation as a support for this, there is Sangye Paldrup's commentary on the autobiographical versus good deeds, in which it says, no matter what region he traveled to, he skillfully prevented people from eating meat. In Kongpo, because of the region, he was unable to prevent eating meat. And it was due to this that he did not go for alms in Kongpo, Mongol regions, or other regions where they only ate meat, it is said. So it's basically said, wherever he went, wherever region he went to, he went in a very skillful way, not forcefully, not forcefully. He would prevent people from eating meat. But in Kongpo, because of the situation of the region, it was difficult to prevent people from eating meat. So in Kongpo, and so also Mongol regions. So Mongol regions here means the northern regions, and the region of Changtang. where there was very little to eat other than meat. So these are regions where one only ate meat. And so in those regions, he would not usually go for alms and so forth. And the reason he wouldn't go is that because in those regions, they only ate meat. They didn't have anything else to eat. And so everyone would say that it was that this is the reason why he didn't go to these regions. So that is one thing. And it's not only that. And Mikyo Dorje is in his, we see this in the text that Mikyo Dorje wrote himself. There are many, it's very forceful things about not eating meat. For example, from his great commentary on the Vinaya, he wrote, further, if you put meat, alcohol, and so forth in the Gutora and other certain kinds of torma, you are not taking me as a teacher, you are not appropriate to be my disciple, you are not taking me as a guru. What the meaning of this is, when you're doing the Gutora, the Mahakala, when we have the great Mahakala pujas, if as for the materials, as the ingredients of the pujas, if we actually put meat, you're supposed to put actually meat and alcohol in this, but he said you're not allowed to do this. If you do this, then you are not taking me as my teacher, you're not considering my teacher. And I don't think of you as my students. And so you really need to think, as this is basically what he's saying. So he's really saying very, very forcefully. And so Jesus spoke about this very strongly. So it's basically saying there's nothing else to say, but you had to follow it. So many people used to say this. Many people have said to me that and said the Karmapa has said that if the Karmapa says that if you don't give up meat, you're not a Kajupa, but this is just being too bold. And so they're saying this to me. And they're saying that you say that if you don't give up meat, you're not a Kajupa. And it's not saying I'm saying that you're eating Kajupa. I can't decide whether someone else is a Kajupa. I don't have any ability to tell whether someone's Kajupa or not. But in 2004, when I was talking about preventing the eating meat, I quoted some text of Mikyo Dorje when he said that, and said that the Mikyo Dorje and other previous Kajus had said this. And so what people thought at that time is that I was saying this. And so they thought it was me who was saying that. So similarly, Mikyo Dorje also wrote in his 100 short instructions. What it says there. Here, it is important that once we go forth, we must give up the 8 impure things. We must hold back from meat, alcohol, armors, weapons, riding animals and pack animals, business including interest, crops and houses, and milking and animal husbandry for even a minute. In particular, we should give up even looking at meat, alcohol, and weapons. If you do not give up these 8, you are not part of this Kagyu lineage. So it is important to put this into practice. Well, this is what he says there. And so what this is saying is that you need to give up these 8 individual things. Fourth, and become a monastic. Once you become a monastic, you must give up these 8 things. And what are these 8 things? Now, there are many different ways you can count these, but for Mikyo Dorje, in his thought, the 8 are meat, alcohol, armors, weapons, riding animals and pack animals, business including interest, crops and houses, and milking and animal husbandry. So meat, alcohol, armor, weapons, animals, business including interest, crops and houses, farming, and milking and animal husbandry. Particularly for that, you weren't even to look at meat, alcohol, and weapons. You weren't even allowed to look at them. Forget about actually using them. You weren't allowed to look at them. And if you do not give them up, you are not part of this Kagyu lineage. So it is important to put them into practice. So the monastics who do not give these out are not part of the Kagyu lineage, he is saying. So this is Mikyo Dorje's. is not that Mikyo Dorje is just being audacious and saying this or making it up. So what is the source for saying that if you don't give up the 8, you are not a Kajipa? There are quite citations that Lord Gampopa himself cited. And what it says in the sutra that Gampopa cited is that in the future there will be students who give up the 8 impure things. And so these are things that the followers of the Kagyu must therefore follow. And for that reason, the followers of the Kagyu followers of the Kagyu lineage must give up these 8 things. Now, there are other ways of there are many different ways that the 8 things are explained. Now, I haven't seen the other versions, but Mikyo Dorje explains them in the way that I've just mentioned. And so there are reasons for him to say this. It is not just that he was making an order and being strict about it. It's that you're not allowed to do this because he said so. That's not how he said it. And so for that reason, in Tibet, because of the geography, it is extremely difficult to give up meat. In particular, during the time of Karmapa Mikyo Dorje and our present Mikyo Dorje and our present way of living, there's been huge changes in the lifestyle. It's changed like 10 times, or 10 times as much. So like we looked at the time of, if you say in Mikyo Dorje, if you're saying you shouldn't eat meat, then it's basically the same, you shouldn't eat. Because if you didn't eat meat, there wasn't a lot you could eat. I saw an old book about the list of Tibetan foods. When you looked at them, there were like 100 different Tibetan foods, and 90% of them were all meat. There are very few. That's the actual situation. Forget about other situations. When I was young, when I was born in a nomad family, and I was born in the nomad family, then if you didn't eat meat, then you'd eat butter, and the Tibetan cheesecake, and drink butter, and drink milk, and other than that, there's nothing to eat. There were no vegetables. Okay, you'd eat samba. So other than that, there really wasn't much else to do. It's really difficult, I think. And the actual fact is very difficult to do this. And because it's so difficult, the masters of the great Tibetan master of the past did not particularly say that you should stop eating meat. However, the past Kagyu masters considered it very important to give up meat. And they spoke about the faults, the problems of eating meat and drinking alcohol. And they spoke about the reasons for giving up meat. So I don't need to speak about them all today. I think I'll speak about them tomorrow. I'll speak about how the Kagyu forefathers spoke about not eating meat, and how the masters of other lineages also spoke about not eating meat. So I think I can speak about those tomorrow. So next, what I'd like to speak about is meat that is pure in the 3 ways. So when we talk about meat that has the threefold purity, it's something that actually there's some debates about, there's some issues there. And I don't need to speak about the debates right now. First, I'll speak about the meat that is pure in the 3 ways. And then after that, I won't need to debate it. We'll just... Now, the meat that is pure in the 3 ways is just taught in the Vinaya. And since it's taught in the Vinaya, so I thought I'd speak about this. I almost forgot. Okay, now in Sanskrit and Pali and Chinese and Tibetan, there are the Vinaya scriptures of various schools, so there are several different schools, scriptures, and if we look at them, that our teacher, the Bhagavan, Buddha, paid great attention to the food and conduct of his students in the monastic community. He gave them a lot of advice. In particular, food is a daily necessity for anyone, for any being that is living. You cannot do without it. And since it is a necessity, there's no choice but to eat. And since you have to eat, then at that time in India, there are many different religions or many different philosophical schools, and many of those religions considered practicing austerities to be extremely important. And there are traditions of practicing severe austerities regarding food that would be hard for ordinary people to practice. But the Buddha himself, before he achieved awakening, practiced austerities for 6 years, as he had like total experience of practicing experience. And because he had that experience, he knew that liberation cannot be achieved through austerities alone. And he himself stopped practicing austerities. And after he stopped practicing austerities, he taught his students, and in particular his monastic students, he said that they should not have a livelihood that is so austere that the body cannot tolerate it, that the body cannot bear it. So we should not have that sort of life. Nor should there be such a luxurious lifestyle that one becomes careless. Instead, he instructed students on how to live a lifestyle that does not fall into either extreme, and established codes related to this. In particular, it's necessary to have food every day to continue living, so you have to eat. But that food, we should think about that food as medicine and eat it at the right time and in moderation. And if we were to eat just like dogs or pigs, that wouldn't be okay. And the food that we eat is that for the food, the monastics should go out on alms rooms on every day and eat whatever the faithful donors give. Other than that, they should not choose which one they like better or not, or eat food that is too elaborate or store food and so forth. None of that was allowed. So I think that the meat that is pure in the 3 ways, I think, came around for such reasons and such situations. I think this is very clear. This is because, in general, what we must understand is that from ancient times until present, India has always been the country where there's the largest numbers of vegetarians. It is the country where the most people do not eat meat. In particular, the Brahmin caste was at that time considered the highest caste, and most people in the Brahmin caste at that time did not eat meat. Now, some scholars say that in the past Brahmins did eat meat, but later they didn't. So people do say this, but in our Vinaya texts, it seems from reading those that the high caste Brahmins did not eat meat. So even when the monastics went on their alms round, I think there are very few people who offered them meat, because in the region there are just so few people who eat meat. So when you went to that region for alms, there are few people who would give meat. Likewise, when the monastics went on their alms round, they didn't only go to the high caste households for alms. They also would go to the doors of low caste households and request food and ask for alms. And these lower castes, if there were a family where they ate meat, it's possible that they might eat. And if they offered meat, if we talk about it fundamentally, when you accept alms, you have to take the alms. You have to accept the alms. And if you didn't take the alms, then the donor might think they're being insulted or think they're not being given an opportunity to gather merit. So that is how people would see it. And so for that reason, so the Bhagavan Buddha at that time was different than the others. He said that did not consider whether costs are high or low, and thought that there needed connections made people of every level of society. So fundamentally, whether they're rich or not, one had to eat whatever food was the donors offered, and was not made to choose. I'm going to eat this, but not eat that. The monastics didn't have a choice to make were not allowed to make that individual choice. Now, does this mean that according to the Vinaya, that the monastics may eat any meat that is offered to them? It's probably not that sort of situation. That is not how it is. And how we know this is that in Tibetan we have the Uttara Grantha Vinaya text to the Mula Sarvastivada tradition. Now, I don't need to say what it says, but the main point of this is that there are several types of meat that one should not eat, such as the flesh of some types of birds, including owls, of reptiles and amphibians, such as toads, of the meat of carnivores, such as lions, tigers, and bears. These types of meat were not allowed to eat. Not only were you not allowed to eat those type of meat, you weren't allowed to eat the fat or the other juices of these inappropriate meats, and also raw meat was not allowed to be eaten. And the monastics were not allowed to eat meat killed specifically for the monastic sake. And so many of these. So there's several of these types of meat were not allowed to be eaten at all, whether or not they were pure in the three ways or not. There's no need to look at whether they were pure in the three ways or not. They're just not allowed to eat them. But if the meat was allowed, if it's not in that list of inappropriate meats, if it is an appropriate meat, you should first examine whether it is pure in the three ways. And if it is pure in the three ways, you can eat it. If it is not pure in the three ways, then you may not eat it. And so for that reason, you'd have to first examine whether it is pure in the three ways or not. And if not, if you just do whatever you want and eat it without caring, there's the danger that you have the offense of eating impure meat. And so for that reason, and so you need to think about whether the meat was pure in the three ways or not. Now the question is, who does this determination of whether meat is pure in the three ways apply to? Because the Buddha had both monastic and lay students. So is this determination of meat being pure in the three ways, is this for monastics, or is it for the lay students, or is it for both monastic and lay students? If you ask this, it's primarily for the monastic. And this is very, it's clear that this, so. However, in these days, there are some scriptures of the Vinaya from different schools that we still can read that state that even people with the lay precepts should eat only meat that is pure in the three ways. But in general, in terms of the Vinaya, in general, it's the meat that is pure in the three ways, primarily a rule and a presentation for the monastics. And so this is quite clear. So I think it's probably better to take a break now. So we'll take a break, and then we'll see whether this meat is pure in the three ways or not.